Greetings, everyone, to another Swedenborgian online community gathering and service. Tonight, we are especially blessed and honored by our guest, the Dr. Rebecca Esterson. Welcome, Rebecca. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here with you all.
Oh, great. And we are especially honored, not just given your presence, but kind of your carried history and knowledge and beautiful spirit. I got to know you, of course, through my time at the seminary out in Berkeley, California, and you are the Dorothea Harvey. Correct me if I get this wrong, but the Dorothea Harvey Professor of Swedenborgian Studies and the Assistant Professor of Sacred Texts and Traditions at the Center for Swedenborgian Studies and the Graduate Theological Union.
Yes. It's a mouthful. Yes. Yes, I'm very honored to have the chair in Dorothea Harvey chair in Swedenborgian Studies. She was the very first woman ordained in the Swedenborgian Church and a supporter of our seminary, and it's just really a privilege to be there in her name.
Wonderful. Yeah. And not to sidetrack us already, but could you tell us just briefly who Dorothea Harvey was?
Yes, so like I said, she was the very first woman ordained in the church. She was a minister and a scholar, and she wrote some wonderful resources for us. She has a book called The Holy Center that I sometimes use in my classes, showing how the tabernacle of Israel from the Bible is symbolic of kind of our inner life journeys. And and she donated her estate to our seminary after her death, and so her legacy lives on in our work at the seminary. We're very, very privileged to carry her name forward through our work at the seminary.
Yes, we all are privileged by that and her impact and presence, and yours as well. Again, thank you for being on. And I also have to thank everyone in our Chatsy. Those of you who want to text chat with us live can always do that at chatsy.com/Swedenborg. And we always appreciate the community involvement of each other and connecting, checking in, and asking questions. And you can also, if you're joining us live, you can always call in as well. We may or may not be able to get to you in an interview like this, but I'll mention the call-in number. It's 646-564-9571. And Rebecca, Dr. Esterson, could you tell us a little bit about your role at the Center for Swedenborgian Studies and the Graduate Theological Union?
Sure. So we have this amazing situation at the Graduate Theological Union. The GTU, as it's called, is this consortium of seminaries and centers for religious studies in all different religions. You might have already talked somewhat about this with Devin or others, but there's a Center for Jewish Studies and a Center for Dharma Studies, Center for Islamic Studies, there's a Buddhist Studies Institute, and then there's 13 centers representing lots of different religions, and then there are 9 member schools representing various Protestant and Catholic Christian seminaries. And we have a center there. We have a Center for Swedenborgian Studies. We have a presence there at the school, GTU. But our center it's a center for the Graduate Theological Union, but it's also a seminary. So it's also its own independent seminary for the Swedenborgian Church. And it's also known by the New Church Theological School, the name the New Church Theological School. So all of the ministers for the Swedenborgian Church in North America come through our program and study with us, and in one way or another. And they, so we're these two things at once. We're the Center for Swedenborgian Studies, at the GTU, participating on the world stage there at the GTU, part of the conversation, interreligious conversation around theological education. But we're also the seminary for our denomination. So we kind of have these two hats. And those of us who are on faculty there wear these two hats. We teach classes for our seminary students and for our Swedenborgian students who are there at the GTU. And then we also teach courses that are not specifically Swedenborgian studies. We teach courses for the general student body at the GTU.
Wow. Well, that sounds like quite the place and quite the role that the Center for Swedenborgian Studies has. And I can only thank you for your part in my education, the center as a whole, and the Graduate Theological Union. But it sounds like, with both those roles for each of you all, the professors, it sounds like you could easily take on too much in that kind of...
Yeah, I think that's the challenge for sure. But it's also very, very exciting for us on faculty here to be able to be both serving our church and interfacing with the clergy and those who are training to be clergy, really participating at that level, but also be able to be in conversation with leaders and educators in other traditions and have a place at the table. We're such a teeny tiny little religion. We're such a small tradition. And yet we have a place at the table here. It's very exciting. There are many religious traditions that are much bigger than us, more well-known, and that don't have a center or place at the GTU. So it's really a great privilege and very, very exciting. I think I speak for all of us on faculty. Exciting to be able to be doing that.
Wonderful. And it's exciting for us associated with the church and Swedenborgianism at large. To have you all there, such shining examples of scholars and Swedenborgians and interfaith people who are willing at least uplift people in such a kind of universal setting where you're, as you said, you're in this conversation with so many leaders throughout the religious world, and at least my impression of the school is that Swedenborgians especially, I think, thrive in that kind of interfaith, kind of diverse setting. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, it's a very comfortable place for us to be. I think so.
That's wonderful.
I'm actually getting ready to travel to Denver for the annual meeting of the American Academy of Religion and the Society for Biblical Literature. It's this big gathering once a year of people who are involved in one way or another in the study of religion and theology, and there's like 10,000 people descend on a different city every year. So I'm getting ready to go to this in November in Denver, and I'll be participating in a workshop on interfaith pedagogy, or how to teach in a multi-faith classroom. And I'm very excited to participate in that, and because that's what we're doing at the GTU, and it's be exciting to be a part of that.
That's excellent. Yeah. Well, you said it right there. It's quite exciting to connect with people of various backgrounds and cultures, and it's great that you're so involved, that you're teaching in that setting and sharing. And you recently gave a workshop, I believe, called Interpersonal and Interfaith Encounter as Religious Pilgrimage with the Pacific Coast Association of the Swedenborgian Church.
So the way our church is arranged is by regions, as you know. So each region has a number of churches that have a certain amount of autonomy in the way they govern themselves. So the Pacific Coast Association is all the churches up and down California and into New Mexico. And once a year, they get together for meetings. This year it was in San Francisco. And we were very fortunate to have the keynote speaker, Dr. Catherine Baruch, who teaches also at the GTU, and she is a specialist in religious pilgrimage. She came and talked to us about her work with the British Pilgrimage Trust, and she just was really wonderful, helping us think about a religious pilgrimage. So I designed my workshop around what she brought to us during the keynote, and I wanted to think about the way we interact with each other, the way we interact with other people, or interpersonal encounter, as a kind of pilgrimage. And so I started by asking everybody there, what's the difference between tourism and pilgrimage? And we had a conversation distinguishing between these two and acknowledging when the distinction is fuzzy. You might be on vacation somewhere as a tourist, and then suddenly you find yourself in kind of sacred space and having a religious or spiritual experience, and so you may suddenly feel as though you're on a kind of pilgrimage. So we talked about the distinction between these two modes of being a tourist versus being a pilgrim. And then I suggested we think about kind of a spiritual sense to these ideas, to being a tourist versus being a pilgrimage. What is the difference spiritually when we are encountering another person? Are we engaging with them as though we are a tourist, maybe a kind of consumerist attitude? What do we have to gain, or how can I manipulate the conversation? How can I win the argument? What can I gain from this? How can I boost my ego? Versus a kind of pilgrimage attitude of where you're coming for a spiritual encounter, an encounter with the divine. So it was a very rich conversation, and then I asked the participants to think about what we in the Swedenborgian Church have in our toolbox to help us in our interpersonal encounters and to help us realize more of a pilgrimage mindset. So.
That's really beautiful. But even just what you shared, encapsulating it is quite inspiring, and it sounds really important, a really healthy approach to maybe uplift how we connect and interact with people, so that we're not just tourists and as you were saying, motivated and allowing ourselves to be motivated and act in selfish ways, but instead to think of it more as a pilgrimage. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's quite inspiring. Thank you.
I see we have Albert is saying that he is a member of the Pacific Coast Association. So he's with us in spirit in a way. Yeah.
That's
Even
great.
though he's in Lincoln, Nebraska.
And we're really happy to have you in the Chatsy as well. Often our guests, it can be a lot coming on a show like this, and most people don't join in on the Chatsy, although it's quite a wonderful place to have your voice heard and connect with people. So it's great to have you in there, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm in there as Rivka.
Rivka.
So that's me. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. And so how did you think it went? How was your workshop, and also how was the weekend overall?
The weekend was amazing. They really went all out, the San Francisco Church, in their hospitality for the group. John Gwynn, John Gwynn well.
Yeah.
He did all the cooking for everyone, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and he did it in a kind of meditative, contemplative, spiritual practice mode for himself, which was amazing to watch and experience. And so the food was just absolutely fantastic. It was a real feature of the weekend, to be the hospitality and the sense of community and communion was really great. And so in the workshop, I was able to kind of open it up to this room and ask the question, what do we have as Swedenborgians? What do we have in our toolbox? And it was really beautiful what people came up with, this idea that we have this very precious idea that we have in our faith, that that heaven is diverse, that we don't leave behind our identifying features at death, that we bring with us the things that make us unique and that make us individual. And as a consequence, heaven is diverse and it's made perfect by its diversity. That's something Swedenborg says, that heaven is made perfect, more perfect by difference and by diversity. And so if that's our model of heaven, how much more so on earth, that we can see differences in each other as actually a quality of heaven, a heavenly quality, and that when you encounter someone who's different than you, that's not a problem to be overcome. You don't have to suddenly just find what's our common ground? The fact that you different it's not a problem. That's what makes our human society more perfect, having differences. There were lots of other ideas, but that's one that rose to the top for me.
Well, what a positive and uplifting view and approach. Something that I'm sure we can each lean into, and sounds like it could lead to some really healthy interacting and uplifting of others, because if we're talking about heaven being diverse, and as you were saying, wanting to lean into allowing that now, accepting that heaven is around us in its diversity, and uplifting people wherever they are, instead of trying to necessarily win them over or convert them or condemn them, etc.
I like what you said, meeting people where they are, uplifting people where they are. That's a very nice way of phrasing it.
Yeah, and hopefully they're probably doing the same with us, and it would be nice to be on that same page.
Yeah, Swedenborg has this idea that there are many different levels and many different kinds of loves. There are heavenly loves and there are hellish loves. And even in the variety of kinds of heavenly loves and a variety of kinds of hellish loves. And the worst kind of hellish love is the love of dominating other people, the love of winning over or controlling or having power over other people. And the worst kind of love is when that's done in the name of religion. And so we have to be very careful. And when if we find ourselves trying to persuade somebody else about the truth of faith, the little red flag should go up of, okay, am I doing this for me? Am I doing it for them? Am I here as a tourist or am I here as a pilgrim?
Those aren't the only things you're teaching, of course. You also have your workload at the GTU and CSS. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done and what you're doing this semester and on? I had the great pleasure of, not to keep going here, but I had the great pleasure of taking one of your classes called Swedenborgian Biblical Spirituality during an intersession. And I took another intercession class with you, although I didn't do it for credit. And it's just wonderful to hear, as we've already learned in this conversation, to hear your point of view. And I love your approach to things and your creative and uplifting mindset. So, I'd like to hear more about that stuff.
Thank you. So I'm teaching 2 classes right now. I teach Swedenborgian Biblical Exegesis for our Swedenborgian students and really anybody who's interested at the GTU. So Swedenborgian Biblical Exegesis, what that means is how Swedenborg and Swedenborgians interpret the Bible. So my second class is for the GTU more broadly. It's not a specifically Swedenborgian class, and that is History of Biblical Interpretation. And it's not just Christian, it's Jewish and Christian biblical interpretation through history. So we kind of trace 2 parallel tracks, Jewish and Christian, the ways that Jews and Christians have read and understood the Bible. So those are my 2 classes. Wow. They're definitely related. I find myself forgetting what I've said, whether I've said something in one class or the other, because they're very related in content.
Yeah, so you find that the exegesis, and I want to know more about what exegesis is but you find that that has a lot of parallel with when you're talking about, yeah, the history of interpretation, I guess, with between Jews and Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us more about those classes and what they're about?
The Swedenborgian biblical exegesis class, we start with kind of considering what we mean by correspondences, this key idea that Swedenborgians use in interpreting the Bible, correspondences. And so I come at it from a kind of an unusual angle. Instead of just jumping into the Bible, we first consider correspondences in the natural world, the way the natural world corresponds to our inner spiritual lives. And then we consider dream interpretation, actually, and how our dreams, our subconscious dreams actually can be interpreted as correspondences. And I do that because that's what Swedenborg was interpreting his own dreams before he turned to the Bible. And he was using the same methods of interpretation. So we kind of come at it from these two angles of the natural world and the subconscious world and think about correspondences that way first. And then we start at the beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1, and we go to the end of the Bible with the book of Revelation, and we look at how Swedenborgians have interpreted biblical stories using correspondences. One of the assignments that's been very successful with this class is I have students pick a story of the Bible, and then they have to research three things. They have to figure out what Swedenborg says about it. They have to find an old sermon or interpretation from a Swedenborgian prior to 1975, and then a recent or current sermon or interpretation. So three things. And then they give a presentation on these three kinds of, on these three sources. And it's very nice because it gives us a bit of a sense of history of that Swedenborgians have been doing this. And we don't just need to look to Swedenborg, but there's a tradition here. There's a tradition, there's a life behind this practice of interpreting.
Well, that's really cool. Yeah, it's funny, that assignment is similar to a lot of the work I've been doing lately, because every other week, I write a multimedia service that I don't speak, it's posted with some music videos. But then the other weeks, I find sermons from other Swedenborgians for the most part and share those. And as I've been looking through kind of different archives, it is interesting to see each personal style, and also maybe I'll pay a little more attention to the historical arc of it. That's fascinating.
Well, we should share resources of where we look for Swedenborgian sermons.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
There are places where they're compiled, but I have a 2-page list of websites for students to go to. We also have our library, of course. We have our archives with a lot of 19th century sermons and older material, some of which is online and some of it isn't. But I'm compiling a list of websites, and there's actually quite a lot online that you can access.
Okay. That's great. I think I'll be the real beneficiary from that sharing of sources. Let's do that. And yeah, that library there is wonderful. So many, as you mentioned, people have given their estates and their book collections, their letters, their journals to that library. And so it's such a resource that has so many perspectives.
Yes, all members of the Swedenborgian community online are welcome to come to Berkeley, and we'll give you a tour of our archives. There are a lot of treasures in there.
Now, it seems like your other class around Jewish and Christian interpretation of the Bible and kind of the interaction there is also what I gather. It seems like that would be kind of a tough subject to approach sometimes.
Yes, it is very complicated history and difficult history at times. I teach another class related that's called Jews, Christians, and the Bible. It's a slightly different emphasis than this one, but both they're related in terms of thinking about how Jews and Christians have impacted and influenced each other over the ages, and really since the first century, these are two traditions that have always been in the world together. They've been in the world together, and so they've developed in ways that respond to the other. So I think it's important actually to study them side by side to the extent that we can.
You have shared a number of fascinating ideas and perspectives around Swedenborgianism and, the similarities between what you were talking about earlier, the correspondences and symbolism in Swedenborgianism with, the Kabbalah and Judaism. Is that right?
Yeah, I have written about this on the Swedenborg Foundation's website. There's a 2-part blog post. They have a scholarly blog series, and I think if you actually Google Swedenborg and Kabbalah, it's the first thing that comes up. At least it was for a while there. And so I tackle this question of whether or not Swedenborg studied Kabbalah, which is a question that has been around since Swedenborg was alive, because at times Swedenborg's writings look a lot like Kabbalah. So readers of Swedenborg from the 18th century to the present day have asked the question, was Swedenborg reading Kabbalah or not? And it's a difficult question to answer. It's actually harder than you'd think to answer, partly because Swedenborg doesn't reference any particular Kabbalistic text or teacher. So when he is sounding a lot like Kabbalah, which he does a lot of the time, we're left to speculation about where the connection is, and if there's a connection or if it's a coincidence.
Well, and Kabbalah has been around much earlier than Swedenborg, right? So, he had a number of travels, and he studied quite a bit in religion, even though that wasn't his profession. He started writing these mystical theological books in his 50s. But yeah, you would think he would have maybe some awareness of that. It's not like it's a far distant idea in Europe, I would think.
No, he definitely would have had an awareness. It was in the air. There was a fascination with rabbinic texts and with Kabbalistic thought around him at that time. Natural philosophers were reading Kabbalah. Leibniz in particular is a source for Swedenborg of Kabbalistic ideas. And at Uppsala University, where Swedenborg studied, there was an effort to have experts in Kabbalah on the faculty who were teaching and writing and translating Kabbalistic texts and even writing Kabbalistic commentaries on the New Testament. So this was definitely in the air. He would have for sure been aware of all of this, and I actually think his lack of reference of Kabbalah is telling, maybe not so much of his unawareness of it, but of his, for whatever reason, intentionally leaving it out.
Well, it's interesting that in a lot of his scientific works before he started publishing anonymous theological books, he does very extensive references. I've noticed, this person looked at the blood vessels here, and he gives a lot of references. But in his theological works, he almost, it seems, clearly intentionally left out clear references, except essentially to the Bible quotes that he uses, because he has no references whatsoever except for some of his conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there are different theories on how to interpret that fact. He himself said that, he didn't study theology, he didn't study spiritual commentaries because he needed to be a kind of clean slate. The only problem with that argument is that even the scientific sources, even those sources that he is referencing in his so-called scientific corpus, such as Leibniz, are themselves embedded in theological contexts, are embedded in theological traditions. And so there's no way that he could have been really a clean slate in that way.
Yeah, and I had also heard that he went to the University of Uppsala. They required theological studies. His dad, of course, was a bishop in Sweden, and also probably had. I know he had a number of like theological conversations growing up, of course.
Absolutely, yes, no, absolutely, yeah. He was a major of philosophy major. And if you look up what's being taught in philosophy in Uppsala University, it includes things like the study of rabbinic sources, and it's not, it has connections to religious thought.
And maybe to him, he didn't really get into it very far, given, he never made it a point to study theology, especially after, his teen years at the university, or young teen years, I think. Maybe he started at like 12, and then he got so into science and other pursuits and political pursuits that it seemed like he didn't, although he liked visiting churches every once in a while in certain cities, maybe he just felt like he stopped focusing on it, so he didn't qualify as a learned resource. Well, thank you for, Agnes. Thank you for exploring that topic with us. And, I think many of us find details around Swedenborg interesting, different theologians and philosophers, but especially, of course, being Swedenborgian community online, being so heavily influenced by his writings, it's nice to get some of his context. And he's just a human writer, right? So it's good to know.
Well, and in the end, with my blog posts about Swedenborg and Kabbalah, I conclude that there's a lot we don't know and we can't know about whether Swedenborg was directly influenced, but we can still have fun with the comparisons. We can still enjoy thinking about where the shared horizon is between Kabbalah and Swedenborg. Those who are interested in Kabbalah, there's no reason why you can't engage in that kind of study in comparative analysis. And there's a lot there. There's a lot there to be mined from such a study.
Yeah, it is fun. And it's nice just to learn, whatever the avenue is, maybe it's from something that we're interested in, but I think those parallels or those connections open new doors to us, and we can learn some things from the Kabbalah and what have you.
Yes. I just wrote an article, and it actually is available online. I could provide the link probably, comparing Swedenborg's ascent to heaven and those of the Baal Shem Tov, or the founder of Hasidism, which is a particular branch of Judaism that is Kabbalistic. And so the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of this branch of Judaism. He was alive at the same time as Swedenborg, and he was having experiences of ascending to heaven at the same time as Swedenborg. So I have an article.
Wow.
I can even see if I can pull up the link here.
That's fascinating. So he had some mystical visions of heaven at the same time. Can you tell us something about that?
So the Baal Shem Tov, there's a lot. I don't even know where to begin. Yes, so he was a leader and a healer and an interpreter of scripture for his community in Eastern Europe in the 18th century, and had many kinds of spiritual experiences. But he believed that he was ascending to heaven in order to advocate for the Jewish people who were being persecuted terribly in Poland in the 18th century. So he would have these ascents to heaven where he would meet the Messiah and advocate on behalf of the Jewish people and advocate on behalf of a persecuted Torah in heaven. So we have a sort of secondhand accounts of these experiences of his. And one of the key kind of places where Swedenborg and the Baal Shem Tov intersect is in the opening up of Scripture, the opening up of the meaning of Scripture, and the opening up of kind of the gates of heaven that they both believed they were witnessing. So they did not intersect. They would not have known who the other was. They were living in completely different worlds, but not that far apart geographically, and certainly responding to the same currents and shifts, of the day.
Well, it's amazing to think about him being involved with a movement to fight against this kind of persecution of the Torah. Is that what you said, in the spiritual realm in heaven? That seems to kind of fit with Swedenborg's, not that he describes that, but almost through his somewhat negative and dismissive attitude towards a lot of the Jews he meets, and he kind of generalizes a lot of peoples negatively. Swedenborg does, unfortunately, including Christians, including Muslims. And it would kind of fit that, especially given Christianity of its day, that it would be some of that persecutorial mindset may cross into the next realm, right?
Yeah, so I just posted the link to this paper. And what I'm actually doing in this paper, yes, as you say, Swedenborg is operating in a world that is immersed in a kind of double attitude towards the Jews. That on the one hand, they are this resource, Jewish text, Jewish interpretive methods, Jewish tradition, Jewish knowledge of Hebrew is a resource for Christians for understanding the Bible, and are venerated because of that. Then there's a second attitude, which is anti-Semitic. And both of these trends are reflected in Swedenborg's writing. And what I do in this paper is I try to bring all of that, and in a way I put Swedenborg and the Baal Shem Tov in a room together, or I interface their experiences, and with the help of Emanuel Levinas, who's a 20th century Jewish philosopher who is very interested in the ways that we encounter the other, or the ways that we encounter people who are different from us. And I use Levinas's understanding of the other to articulate what's going on with Swedenborg and the Baal Shem Tov and their experiences of heaven, that their experiences of ascending to heaven are also experiences of encounter with the other, or encounter with their own attitudes toward the other in a way. And if you want to hear more, you'll have to read the article.
Yeah, that's a great teaser, and it's interesting that I see a common theme among your classes and this article, these interests, and your recent workshops. Even the theme of that weekend, which I doubt you got to choose, but this idea of encountering the other, and and I guess you applied it towards this other theme, where you approaching an alien, it's kind of like a pilgrimage, or do we treat it like something else? And I think that's fascinating. I think that's a really important, dialogue, because that's all there really is,
Yeah, so I've been reading a lot of Levinas, and so a lot of this is coming from that. And Levinas has this idea that there are two modes, similar to what I was saying earlier. So this is where my thinking is coming from on this. That there are two modes of being when you encounter another. One is totalitarian, and one is connected to the infinite. So his book is called Totality and Infinity. And the first mode is the mode in which you want everything to be the same. You want other people to look like you. You're interested in highlighting those aspects of other people that are like you, and you're interested in everything being, in a sense, in your own image. And the other mode is the mode of the other, the mode of infinity. And in this mode, when you encounter the face of another human being, and Levinas is definitely interested in the actual human face, and at the encounter with another person's face is where this happens. So when you encounter the face of another, the things about their face that are different, the things about their face that are foreign or unfamiliar, those things are actually connection to the infinite, your connection to the divine. So you can be in a mode where you ignore the differences and you only focus on what's the same, or you can be in a mode where you notice difference, and that difference actually is a vehicle for encountering the divine, or the infinite in Levinas's terminology, the infinite.
Well, that's quite the concept. That's amazing.
I think as Swedenborgians, this works well for us, this idea.
Yeah, encountering people, and I love that idea that it's in the differences where you really see the infinite. And do you acknowledge that? Do you accept it, maybe even love it and uplift it, or do you reject it and either want to control it so that even though it looks different, it's under your dominion, so it's kind of like part of you, so you don't mind? Or do you want to let it be free and retain its diversity and its independence to to its degree? Of course, in community we're interdependent, but I think that's really beautiful and a great point, because it's true. Those are our two modalities.
Yeah, and even in the way we talk about spirituality, often we talk about it in terms of, well, what do we have in common? What do we have in common? This is a different way of thinking about how we encounter each other. It's not so much what do we have in common. It's what I liked what you said earlier, meeting people where they are, not where I am. Where are you?
I think that you can probably trace most of the major destructive trends in this world towards kind of a selfish mindset where you're not willing to meet people where they are and care about even the differences and uplift health. Even that concept, like uplifting goodness and health, can always be taken too far, where you're just defining it for yourself and applying it to everyone else, and so you're saying, well, they're being evil, or that's evil. Not to your point, not willing to see the diversity for something healthy.
Yeah, it's a much more complex way of being in the world, and maybe scarier. Yeah, Levinas is very concerned with war. He's writing during and after the Second World War, and he's very concerned with what is it that makes it okay to go in and kill, and to go in and destroy communities that you have no connection to the life of that community. What makes it okay to do that? And he thinks that if we could look in the eyes of our enemy, he really believes that if we could look face to face in the eyes of our enemy, and kind of hold sacred the things about them in this face to face encounter, that it would be much harder to engage in war, and we would look for ways to avoid it. That's his hope.
Yeah, that's great. It's almost like acknowledging what divinity already does, which is look in the face and the heart and life of every person, and cares about each and every single one of them. Not only that, of course, but the source of their lives, the source of the diversity and beauty are is from the divine. And so in a way, what we're rejecting is God when we reject differences.
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Well, your history, if I can shift gears for a little bit, I only know a little bit of your history, but you were mentioning the denomination at large, the General Church of New Jerusalem, but you have some history with the other denomination in this country and the world, called the General Church for short. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe your history there, maybe just what that organization is and is like?
Yeah, so many of your listeners, I'm sure, are aware that there are different denominations of Swedenborgians in the world. And in particular in the United States, there are a few denominations. The two largest are what we tend to call the General Church and Convention. Convention being the Swedenborgian Church of North America, of which this community is a part. And then the sister denomination is sometimes called the General Church. And I grew up in the General Church. So I grew up the daughter of a minister in the General Church. I grew up in a town called Bernathen, which is a Swedenborgian community. The town itself is all Swedenborgian. And I actually didn't know anybody who wasn't Swedenborgian until I went away to college. And then I went away to college, and that changed everything. So I went. I went away to college, and at Moravian College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I was a psychology major, but I took a lot of religion classes because they were so interesting to me. I just couldn't get enough of learning about what other people believed. Here I had grown up in this very intense religious, totally homogeneous environment, everybody believing the same thing. And I couldn't believe the beauty and the diversity and all of the difference. I was really taken with the study of religion, and it turned into a second major, and it turned into a career. So I went off to Harvard Divinity School to continue my study of world religions. And while I was there, I had the great opportunity of studying abroad in Jerusalem for 3 semesters. And it was there that I met my husband, Rafi, who was also studying abroad from England. And that was the start of my...
correct? A Jewish teacher?
Correct, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep, so we're an interfaith family.
Excellent.
And it was at Harvard that I discovered this beautiful little Swedenborgian church that I didn't know existed right there on campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and that it was part of this whole other denomination of Swedenborgians that I really knew nothing about. But that community in Cambridge embraced me and became my new spiritual home. And for lots of reasons, I have left the General Church, and I've been a part of the denomination of this denomination of convention for about 20 years. About 20 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we are quite blessed to have you, and it's nice that they were so welcoming at that church. What kind of drew you to it? The warm attitude towards a guest?
What drew me to it was a woman named Sarah Buteau, who, if anyone out there knows Sarah, they know exactly what I mean, in that she was just incredibly inviting and welcoming, and she took me by the hand. She was also a student at Harvard Divinity School, and I met her at a opening reception, and she took me by the hand and took me to the church, and the rest is history. She then became the pastor. She wasn't the pastor at that time. At that time, it was Bob Toffel, and he was also very instrumental in my becoming a part of the community there. Yes, wonderful, wonderful community. If anybody's in Cambridge or near Cambridge, Reverend Sage Cole is the minister there now, and I hear they're doing really wonderful things, and it's just a fantastic group of people.
Yes, they are. And it's funny that she came up today. I guess I need to mention this because I talked to her today. She's my mentor coming out of seminary. Reverend Sage Cole. Yeah, she's a beautiful, amazing spirit, and it's nice to connect with her and have that relationship. And I find that's true with a lot of these churches, right? That there's so many, I'm sure it's true in other traditions as well, but I've always been surprised. I joined Swedenborgianism in my mid-20s, and I had heard about it growing up a little bit, but that's it. And I've been quite blown away at just the beauty of the spirits in these communities, and how welcoming and diverse, especially in my experience with this denomination, how open and affirming they are towards people of all shapes, sizes, and creeds and cultures.
Yes, and what I've just loved about being a part of convention is also the diversity of ways that people read Swedenborg, that there's not one way to do it, and you're not in or out by the way you read Swedenborg. There's a whole range in convention of the ways people read and approach Swedenborg, and I just love that freedom and the diversity and the openness and welcoming of different opinions about it. Really works for me. That's been a definite positive. And now I belong to this church here in El Cerrito, Hillside Community, Swedenborgian community at Hillside, and Pastor Tom Muller, another very special group of people.
Yes, they are. That's wonderful. Yeah, both the churches in the Bay Area, you were mentioning the San Francisco church earlier, are quite amazing spaces and communities. If you're in that area, visit them. You don't have to agree with everyone. They don't. We don't agree with each other all the time, but it's just nice to have community.
Thank goodness.
Uplifts that diversity, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. How wonderful. Yeah, and I just said it, but I want to say it again to your point a moment ago, that it's just so welcoming and heartwarming to find these spaces where they are going out of their way to connect and uplift you in your difference, and they don't mind at all. Of course, different people have different mindsets to some degree, but I think that's a real cultural phenomenon within this organization. So you mentioned your husband, Rafi, and he's an amazing person, and you have 3 children as well, I believe.
Yeah, we have 3 children. Believe it or not, they're named Miriam, Moses, and Aaron.
I don't believe it.
Which most people don't get the joke, but when somebody gets the joke, I get very excited. And mostly it's when we're at airport security and a TSA agent looks at our tickets and then looks up and says, "Wait, Moses, Miriam, and Aaron?" And I say, "You went to Sunday school." Yeah, so that's our kids.
Famous biblical siblings.
Storytelling at Passover is very fun for them because the characters in the story are Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. So we have a 3-year-old and a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old. Sorry, 3, 9, and 10. Almost 11.
3, 9, and 10.
3, 9, and 10,
yes. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Given your enthusiasm of them and their names, it seems like things are going well.
With raising children.
Things are going well with raising children, yes.
That's great. It's a funny thing to reflect on, but it's not the easiest job itself, right?
No, definitely not the easiest job. No, it's a labor of love. Yeah, but we're very lucky that Berkeley has been such a good home for us. Berkeley Public Schools, and I mean, talk about diversity. Yay! Here we are in a school district that has a very successful history with busing. I mean, they Berkeley buses so that kids in poorer neighborhoods can go to school in wealthier neighborhoods, and there's a real effort to have economic diversity in the classroom, and it works. It doesn't always work, but in Berkeley it works, and it's very exciting to be in a city that's figured that out. At least it's kind of figured that piece out.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Because all too often you hear kind of the opposite, that cities aren't welcoming to, certain types of transportation because they want to keep people in their silos, which is crazy enough.
Yes, there's a lot of segregation in our public schools still. for lots of reasons.
Yeah, it sounds like you're kind of in the center of a number of entities that, you know, that you feel fortunate about, that you have gratitude towards for good reason. It sounds like.
Yeah. Life has its challenges for sure.
Yeah.
But we've been able to live into our love, a real blessing. Yeah.
And supporting, you know, those communities, I think, goes a long way, not just for our own benefit and peace, but, you know, it allows those groups to flourish and continue and also get the benefit of your perspective and support, of course, to thrive.
Which communities are you talking about now?
Each of those, actually. Berkeley, CSS, those churches, your family, the denomination, all of it. We're all so happy to have you, I'm sure.
So my other spiritual family is my choir that I joined about a year ago, called the Threshold Choir. Some of your listeners may be familiar with that tradition that started here in the Bay Area, and it's a choir that has a practice of singing at the bedside of hospice patients. And there are a number of Swedenborgians and people who are connected to the Swedenborgian Church who are involved in this movement. And it's just been an incredible, I mean, that's a major highlight for me of living here, is being a part of that group.
That's great.
And what they do. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you sharing how much you enjoy it. And yeah, you've been a singer for quite a while, haven't you?
Amateur backup singer. Yes, I sing backup. Yeah. I like to be where the harmonies are happening, but I'm no pro. But yeah, so there was a group of us in Cambridge, at the church in Cambridge. We had an a cappella group called Missing Rachel that sang at the church there, and that was
That's right.
So a group of very, very dear friends. Yeah.
And that's another name coincidence, right? That's why you were named Missing Rachel. Not coincidence, but reference.
We had, yes, the four of us. We had Rebecca, two Rebeccas, and a Leah and a Sarah. And so we came up with the name Missing Rachel as kind of a joke on our names because of the biblical matriarchs of Genesis. The only one we were missing is Rachel. So that's why we call ourselves Missing Rachel. Yeah. Yeah.
And earlier I mentioned your children's, their names are from biblical scripture, but of course that's also Hebrew scripture in this instance, at least. I just wanted to correct that.
Uh-huh.
Well.
Yeah. It's good to remember those things, I think, and often even our characterization around, you know, old, quote unquote, Old Testament or the New Covenant, and how we talk about different books of the Bible as some superseding others, especially in a lot of Christian circles, can be, you know, it can be a touchy issue and kind of trample on others' cultures often, right?
It's a difficult thing. How we yes, there are lots of issues around how we talk about scripture. Is it, as you say, does our scriptural tradition override another scriptural tradition? I'm personally fine with the terminology of Old Testament and New Testament, as are a lot of sort of contemporary scholars of Jewish-Christian relations. For one reason, we just don't have great alternatives, and the designation of old and new doesn't have to bring along a supersessionist stance. Although understanding the history of the supersessionist stance is helpful and important for Christians, especially to understand what that has meant for Jewish communities, the sense that, well, we know our tradition supersedes and takes the place of yours. Yeah, it's a thorny one.
Well, that ties into kind of the overall theme of this conversation and a lot of your work, which is treating others and the stranger with care and pilgrimage in a sense, in its most positive light, right? We thank you for sharing, yourself this evening and your wisdom. I know the community is joyful to have someone like you on, and we hope you come back again soon if you're willing.
Thank you, and yes, it's such an honor to be with you and to be part of this thing that you have going with the online community, and I hope to participate more and get to know some of you all.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, and thank you all for listening and joining in connection with us. Please go forth, applying maybe a little bit more acceptance, as we all should, of diversity and the other into our living and intending, instead of leaning into our more dominating selfish modalities, and go forth knowing that you are quite loved.